Hello everyone, and welcome to the final video in the 12 Days of Deltarune for Chapter 5, because the game comes out tomorrow. Just for everyone who cares, I've decided to take the game at my own pace, which means I will not be streaming it. But yeah, that's my plan. I will record videos, of course, which will go up in the week following, maybe a little bit longer than that. But yeah, this is the last time you're going to see me for a little bit when it comes to Deltarune. Not that long, but you're not going to see me tomorrow. Also, I should mention something from the current worlds of yours that doesn't apply to me right now is the Smile ARG probably gave out its answer by the time this is being released. It might be later today, but I don't know that yet, so yeah. Okay, last thing for real. This video is going to not really include theories as much. I'm going to try to keep it to an absolute minimum. I'm just going to try to show you symbols, literary symbols, from Deltarune and explain their significance. So going into Chapter 5, when you see somebody talking about something, you might think, oh, this is probably what that relates to. So what's a literary symbol? Well, here you go. If you don't know, you can read these descriptions from the dictionary. But basically, it's just a concept that represents something else in the story. So like the example, a lion being a symbol of courage, or a rose being a symbol of love. And Deltarune has quite a lot of them. Some of them more easy to parse than others. So I'm not going to be covering the super obvious ones here. Like, for example, you could make the argument that basically every image from the prophecy is a symbol for something. Some of them are more obscure and we don't obviously know what they're meant to represent. But something like the girl, we have a pretty good idea, right? So let's start with colors. I thought this would be a good place to start because colors touch every element of Deltarune, and also they're very easy to understand, and also if you've played Undertale you already have a leg up because that game explored most of these colors already. So red. Red is probably the most important color in not just Deltarune but Undertale as well. It symbolizes, the soul that you control. In a way, it sort of symbolizes you. That said, there are two major characters that are sort of represented with red, that being the knight and Chris. Chris's red-horned headband, and their, of course, red soul and flickering red little eyes tie them to the color red, as well as the knight having just sort of a red energy that it can expel, and all the red heart pillows, and the red guitar in Dess's room. Assuming Des is the knight, but again, probably. Oh yeah, I should also say, the reason why I have the golden stars section here is because the golden flower represents red in Undertale, so gold and red are probably the same thing in Deltarune as well. So, orange represents bravery. Courage is a very reoccurring theme in Deltarune. Chris specifically seems to need to have courage to sort of gain power. And this kind of makes sense because the main villains of Deltarune are the Titans, and the Titans are all fear monsters. So the act of exposing darkness to light is an act of facing your fear. It is interesting then that Des has all of these orange shoes in her closet. Not just orange shoes in her closet, but also an orange shoe that may represent her in a scene in Chapter 2, where there are these shadows cast on the floor, and you have to pile them all on top of each other to clear the puzzle. Do you remember that one? And so I believe the color orange and shoes both sort of represent something about Des, which we'll get into later. But it's just important to know that orange represents courage. Yellow. So yellow is associated with Noelle. Her party health bar is yellow. And also the symbol that probably represents her in the same shadow puzzle is yellow, plus a symbol that probably represents her from a different puzzle, this one being the photo gathering puzzle from the second board in Tenna's little board games, is also yellow. That said, in the text, the color yellow is most often brought up when talking about Alphys, which is interesting. That could end up paying off in Chapter 5 because, Alphys is the one who gave Asgore all of those anime books, which Chapter 5 seems to be taking its Japanese theming from. Also, there's Friend's yellow eye. Not really sure what that means yet. And sparing enemies, their names become yellow. Green. Okay, green is extremely well cemented. Green is associated with Azrael and Ralsei, as well as healing. Its trait is kindness. Gaster may be green, we don't really know, but that would make some sense based on other stuff. Again, not getting into theories, trying not to. But yeah, green is associated with Ralsei, Azrael, healing, and also the Forgotten Man, I will say. The whole Forgotten Man area where the Forgotten Man can talk is green. Revive mints are green, of course, because they're a healing item. There's the green lizard that Azrael used to be obsessed with. Ralsei is given an item recommendation in the cafe in Castletown. It's green tea, because there's not much to go off of for him aside from his color. There's the mysterious green crayons. Apples are associated with the green marker. And of course, Gerson's whole battle was with green. Two symbols I believe represent Ralsei are in the bottom left corner. That being the green spring photo from Tenna's board game and the green wave. Again, we'll get into those later. Cyan, or light blue. This is probably the least utilized color in Deltarune. Every other color is mentioned by name, but light blue and cyan both go without a single mention. Now, there is the bluebird shadow from the puzzle I keep bringing up, which looks to be light blue or cyan. And there is Chris as well. Chris also looks to be light blue. However, it's hard to say because Chris is often called just blue. We'll see with Susie. Susie is often called Purple Girl a lot. So Chris being called, blue so much could potentially make an argument that Chris is actually supposed to be represented by the color blue and not cyan. Now, Birdly is also blue, and we know that Chris is a fellow bluebird because of him, specifically saying, stay sanguine, my fellow bluebird. It's possible, like with the Tenna line at the top of this slide, only on this show because they weren't blue enough for the Splurfs, that in fact Chris is light blue and not just blue. It's hard to say. This is why we're going to get into more definitive symbols after the colors. There is a couple more interesting things going on with blue in the near future, though. Gerson says about the prophecies, "Ain't it nice to believe a glimmer here and there? I just think those words shine a bit too bright. A path so blue it's all you can see. So I say, why don't we go between the lines? It's darker there." A path so blue is interesting because the Blue Soul's trait is integrity, which means perhaps a path bound by the inability to, give up on your morals, which is, the weird route is kind of all about that. So again, that's pretty interesting. The bluest flower, disciple of my speech section comes from Miss Mizzle's dialogue. And if you look at the Deltarune.com website right now, if you're watching this on the day it released, it's blue flowers all over. So in Chapter 5, a bluest flower probably going to be important in some way. It's hard to guess what this could mean right now, but keep that in mind. Purple. Like I said, Susie is represented by purple, not only in her health bar, Lancer calls her Purple Girl a lot, and the dragon is specifically a purple dragon. If you've played Chapter 4's Gerson fight, you'll know that Susie is the dragon from Dragon Blazers. So this purple dragon line specifically comes from one of Tenna's questions in the board game on which character Azrael used to like the most. There's Sword Magician and Green Lizard and Purple Dragon. So it's safe to say that the Green Lizard and the Purple Dragon were from the same game, which makes sense because Dragon Blazers is based on the prophecy. The twist to this is that Susie is also represented by the cactus, in my opinion, And her symbol of the cactus is the only one that isn't color-coded, which is weird. We'll get into it. All right, the final quote-unquote color we need to talk about is monochrome, or gray. In Deltarune, gray things are copies. We are specifically told by the 7 flying aces in the Chapter 3 egg room that copies are monochrome. The photos in this mini game I keep bringing up, also monochrome, because they're a copy of a real thing, right? That makes sense. Chris has a gray crease on their hand, which probably relates to this, considering this is where we learned about the concept. This is in the egg room as well, Chapter 4's, but still. After smearing the canvas with sketches layered on top of each other. So essentially making copies upon copies of something, until it becomes nothing more than a monochrome smear. All right, now we get into the individual categories. These are about individual symbols in the world of Deltarune that apply to one specific thing probably. Starting with the egg. Now, the egg is probably the easiest symbol to nail down because, well, it's kind of a reference. The eggs are like Easter eggs, and so I believe their symbolic meaning is they are meant to be secrets. Maybe mistakes, but definitely something that is being intentionally hidden. For example, Miss Mizzle, once again, says, "Love is made of eggshells." This is a rather poetic way of saying, like, love is made of mistakes, or love is made of secrets, right? That tracks. Tenna says you can't get this from an egg. The egg in being referenced here being Spamton, who of course keeps a lot of secrets and also has his own eggs going on. Asgore is Toriel's egg's husband in that one joke. He also has a lot of secrets and or mistakes to make up for. Lancer specifically calls Ralsei a sweet basket of eggs and an egg boy. Which could mean anything, but also, it probably relates to the fact that Ralsei was deceiving us, keeping secrets from us. And finally, of course, the lizard is associated with eggs. Obviously, this is an elaborate Yoshi reference, but there's more to convince me this is more than just a reference coming up very quickly. This once again ties Ralsei with eggs, which, yeah, that does make sense. And of course, the Forgotten Man is the biggest secret. Who the Forgotten Man is, who gives you these eggs in the first place. I guess also I should mention, given the egg rooms seem to relate to Chris's trauma, this somewhat connects Chris with eggs, and Friend is also connected with eggs due to the Spamton sweepstakes, where Noelle received a strange egg in her Cat Petters game, and Friend is obviously very much related to cat petters. There's also potential that Papyrus might be related to eggs. A lot of people over the years have said that Papyrus might be the Forgotten Man. In Undertale, during the dating scene with Papyrus, an egg spawns as part of the UI, so it's possible. Could also just be a joke. Similar to the egg is the apple. Now, I'm not entirely sure what the apple represents. In the wider world of media, an apple can generally represent the forbidden fruit, as it was in the Garden of Eden tale. And it seems like that might be what's going on in Deltarune as well. There's this very elaborate scene in Chapter 4 of Chris closing their eyes and letting Ralsei feed them an apple, which could be a metaphorical way of explaining how Chris knows what's going on, right? Chris might know the prophecy already. After all, Ralsei's only concerned about Susie seeing the last prophecy, more so than Chris. And Ralsei and Chris keep having these sidebars, which makes me think that maybe Ralsei actually gave Chris forbidden knowledge. That could be what this scene is trying to imply. Of course, Chris also has a head that smells like apples, as if, you know, they've got forbidden thoughts in that little head of theirs. Lancer calls both Ralsei and Chris at the same time a delicious little apple. It's unclear who he's referring to specifically. To be fair, that's also true of Egg Boy, but it makes a lot more sense for Ralsei to be the Egg Boy for many reasons. And Chris's tea also tastes like apple juice. So whatever this apple-related symbol ends up being, it's absolutely going to be related to Chris and something going on with them. All right, next is the reptile. And I'm calling it that instead of lizard or snake specifically because I think those two things are the same symbol in this world. but they might be two different people who represent the same sort of thing. Let me explain. So, of course, we've already talked about how Ralsei seems to be related to this lizard character. And this is further cemented by this colorful little description of the hero_scarf figure. It says, a stunning replica of your favorite Fluffy, character from the classic game series you know and love. His long scarf can be used to hang on to hooked objects, which will allow you to cross gaps and scale tall, tall heights. Some say it looks like the lips or tongues of a long lizard, which is another charming point in favor of this velveteen masterpiece. So, in other words, people used to mistake the character that represents Ralsei from the prophecy as a lizard because of Ralsei's scarf. And so that, once again, ties Ralsei in with eggs, but it also creates this recursive situation where Asriel really liked Ralsei as a character in this game, the lizard, and Ralsei is very clearly based off of Asriel somehow, so it's kind of like a paradoxical thing where they're both based off of each other. Kind of fun. What's less fun is the fact that the lizard seems to represent a sacrifice. Asriel goes to the church to ask forgiveness for dropping the lizard in the big pit to jump high. And in this description of the Ralsei figure, they specifically mention that it allows you to cross gaps and scale tall, tall heights. It seems like Ralsei's in trouble, is all I'm saying. The snake is slightly different. I don't think Ralsei is the snake. But the snake is also like the lizard, maybe somebody doing something in association with eggs and maybe even sacrifices. That being the line from a tweet Temmie tweeted a very long time ago when Deltarune started development about a cat's tail being a snake in disguise. You know about the tail of hell, of course. So the idea that Friend, who is a cat, their tail is a snake, it's really tying Friend into this whole reptile theming. Maybe the snake and the lizard are two different things, but they're both related to eggs. Here's a fun thing though. What if the snakes are known for eating eggs? So this might be tied together for that reason. That the person who's supposed to essentially cause Ralsei to need to sacrifice himself is Friend. That's more of a theory than anything that we can really get from the text, but the big thing you should take away from this is that Ralsei is probably a sacrifice of some kind. Speaking of Friend, let's talk about roots. This group of symbols that seem to relate to it. Of course, the first is the Tail of Hell. We don't know much about the Tail of Hell, but in doing this analysis, I've become convinced it has something to do with Susie. Because there's this recurring motif with Susie about Noelle seeing her tail, and her hiding her tail. And really, other than the Tail of Hell, and Jevel's tail, those are the only important tails in the game. In fact, once again, one of the recommendations from the cafe for Susie is the black tail churros. And, I mean, if you've seen Friend, a black tail should make you a little bit nervous, especially because this only happens after the cat has been transformed into a cat cafe in Chapter 4. The now already tail on tight line at the bottom of this slide comes from Susie Zilla, where Susie turns into a lizard. Again, probably means nothing. Anyway, roots. Okay, if we knew not that much about the tail, we know even less about roots. Roots is a prophecy from Chapter 4. It's got a house surrounded by 2 trees. There's also a house that shows up in the shadow puzzle in Chapter 2, along with those other symbols we've already talked about. It is purple, probably relating back to Susie. So once again, Susie is being factored into this whole Tail of Hell situation. I think this is a little harder to understand. The purple symbol seems to represent Susie's rough home life, right? But roots seems to represent hometown in general. After all, it's a house surrounded by trees. If you sort of zoom out to what hometown actually is, it's a bunch of houses surrounded by trees. So maybe the house doesn't just represent Susie having a rough home life, but her past of being sort of a pariah in hometown and other places she's lived. And then there's trees. The tree is probably the most multifaceted symbol in Deltarune. What I mean by that is it still means the same thing, but so many people are related to it. Same with the egg, to be honest, but the tree is even more so. So what does the tree represent? Well, the forgotten man is behind the tree. And in the art therapy section in the chapter 4 egg room, a tree is painted over everything. This seems to imply that the tree is being used to cover up trauma, and that makes some sense. In chapter 1, there is a section where you have to sort of ring around the rosy with this sort of diamond spike thing, right? And you have to do that because there's a tree blocking your path. Doing that reveals a hidden tree with a switch inside of it. So once again, we are not only being blocked by a tree, but the tree is hiding. There's also some lesser important stuff, like Undyne rescuing Caddy's family from a tree. That could potentially tie cats and trees together, which it would make sense because friend is already associated with eggs, that friend might be associated with trees, but that's pretty loose. Similarly with Tenna's desert board, he insists the trees are green, which could imply that, like, okay, well, Ralsei is clearly represented by green, that Ralsei has connection to the tree, but again, that's pretty vague. And once again, I have to impress upon you. I'm talking about like foreshadowing and symbolism here. So obviously, literally, Tenna is not talking about Ralsei being a tree or whatever in this line. Tenna is just talking about, making a joke about the trees on the board being different, and that's what makes the board different. But reading these lines back in the future might give us, a retrospective like, oh, sensation. And that's because these are meant to be foreshadowing. We don't know what's meant to be foreshadowing yet because we haven't got to the truth yet. But we can take a stab based on recurring motifs. That's what this whole video is about. Finally, there are two other uses of trees. One is one of the entry fields on the shelter. Again, a tree is stopping us from getting somewhere. But also, a tree being the symbol for the holiday family, because it's a pine tree in specific. The holidays are obviously associated with Christmas. This is also interesting, given what the tree probably means. The final example is this pixel art hometown tree at the very bottom. This is from the Mantle minigame in Chapter 3. In that game, you have to gain levels to be able to break these trees to move into more interesting areas, right? So once again, a tree is blocking our path, and it is hiding something. And that is what I believe the tree is meant to represent. It's meant to represent repression, as in hiding something from yourself. That's why the unknown man's tree hides the unknown man. It's why the holidays are associated with trees, because they know probably what happened to Des, but they don't want to believe it. It's why the shelter is hidden by a tree, because of course everyone knows what's in the shelter, or what happened in the shelter and why it needs to be locked, except for us, of course. And it's why in the Mantle game the trees block our path, because we're trying to access secrets that people don't want us to know. And on that theme of secrets, that also makes sense why the tree and the egg are so related. The egg is the secret that the tree is repressing. Finally, to do with this friend section is smiles. I've left a link in the description to a Half-Bred Chaos video about smiles, because I think it goes into this topic a lot better than I will. But just a really short understanding of smiling as a symbol in Deltarune is that when someone is forced to smile, that's bad. Ralsei is smiling all the time. He is forcing himself to smile constantly. Susie smiles right after she sees the last prophecy to cover up her pain. Similarly, when you're fighting the knight, Chris smiles. And Tenna promises that if they've forgotten how to smile, he'll make them remember. Chapter 5 seems to revolve around this concept somewhat of like forcing yourself to smile. With the ARG that I mentioned that you might have the answer to now, how long did it take her to smile? And the assertion on the newsletter for Chapter 5's release that let's smile again. Yay! Again, I think this could tie in with Friend and the Tree and the Egg, given that it's kind of about repression of your true feelings. Like, this smile motif is usually about smiling through the pain, and it's no mistake that, like, Friend and Jevil and Gaster and Spamton and Sans all have these permanently affixed smiles on their faces, because that's what they do. They smile through the pain. All right, our next section is called Lost. These are symbols that relate to Des, and she's got a lot of them because she can't be here, so we need a lot of symbols to tell us things about her. The first is the most obvious. It's the guitar. When you see a guitar, it's got something to do with Des, which is kind of weird because, like, obviously there's the red guitar, and Raise Up Your Bat, Chris plays a red guitar, but the puppet scarf description, if you try to give it Noelle, she says it feels like guitar strings. And also, in Chapter 4, if you try to go backwards, after you've seen the last prophecy back into the Dark World, a hand will push you back. And this hand will play a minuscule, very, very quiet sound, which is a guitar strum. So this implies, I mean, once again, the knight is Des, but also with the puppet scarf thing that maybe Des struggled with the same thing that Chris and Spamton did. This feeling of being, you know, unfree, trapped. The shoe I foreshadowed earlier. I do believe the shoe is an important symbol of Des's. It represents her desire to, well, be free, for one, but also be different than who she is. Some of these are definitely stretches, like the dating shoes thing, which leads directly into the freeze ring, which is interesting. The thrash machine has sporty shoes for the athletic thrashing machine in your life, which you could describe Des as, in a way. She has shoes fit for hooves in her closet. Spamton says, turn up the juice, make sure you don't get it on your shoes, which could honestly be nothing, but given that Spamton seems to know the identity of the knight, it's interesting that he could mention that. And finally is the description for Pluie, which says, put on your shoe, hey, and sprint. It's raining cats and cats. Bring the chosen ones to the Ark. If you want to see a deeper dive into that, check out my Des is human hypothesis. It's not because Des is human. It's actually a tangent in that video at the very end, but that's where it is. Perhaps most importantly going into Chapter 5 is this new symbol I hadn't even really considered up until now, which is the sun. This symbol seems to represent Noelle, as we said in the yellow section. And at the same time, given the themes of Chapter 5 from what we can understand them to be so far, I would argue the sun probably represents nostalgia, or the past, the desire to go back to the good old days. And it's interesting because the Chapter 5 egg room, the Forgotten Man foreshadows it will be on Sunday, where he harvests the wheat. That's the day this is taking place, Sunday. After a long night, the sunrise is the same as always. Well, in this chapter, apparently the sun is going to go down and probably not come up again. Miss Mizzle mentions that she shines more than the sun, the moon, and all of the stars. Probably doesn't mean anything, but given she's had other important foreshadowing dialogue before, maybe it does. And finally, Sham warns us that we don't want to be here when the sun goes down in the Dark World. So that's ominous, because the sun's going down in Chapter 5. Actually, the real final thing is this recommendation for Noelle, which is unused, in the Chapter 4 Cat Cafe, where she's offered the paw print Sunday. I just think this is interesting, that Sunday might be a theme in Chapter 5. It's literally the day of the sun, and then the sun will go down. It really just kind of makes me believe that Chapter 5 is going to be about letting go of the past. Like, the sun's literally going to go down and we can't see it anymore. We can no longer sort of reminisce about it. Interestingly, there is a juice combo in Chapter 4. Most of these have fairly generic sort of anime-sounding names like Dragon Scar. But this one's called Sunset Requiem. And given the chapter right after 4 is the one that seems to revolve around the sun, it is very interesting that this is a sunset requiem. A requiem being a mass for the dead, or a solemn chant in response to the dead. So this could be about like a requiem for the sunset, for sure, or a requiem that takes place at sunset. When the sun sets, we will have a requiem for someone who is dead. implying, someone might die in chapter 5. And this is more out there, but Toby wrote a song for Homestuck many, many years ago called Sunsetter. And I was listening back to it because I was like, I bet Sunsetter might be referenced in chapter 5. And then I learned about Sunsetter's ska version. This one has lyrics, which are on the left side of the screen. And this just seems to be a theme statement for chapter 5. This is just what chapter 5 is going to be about. Forget about your past, forget about your future, forget about your job, break your weapon in two. Just don't forget your friends because they'll pull you through. Yeah, I mean, that sounds right. And not to mention the final line of this song, sitting on the roof just to watch the setting sun, seems to be directly referenced in the chapter 5 trailer, where all of our characters are standing on a roof watching the setting sun. Also, could mean nothing, but Azrael listens to religious ska. And if this is about the prophecy, like if chapter 5 in the prophecy is about the sunset, then it would be religious, and this version of Sunsetter is ska. So maybe that's what has been implied by that this whole time, and we just didn't even know. This is the fun part about symbols and foreshadowing. Finally for this section is the star. Now, this is the one that's least connected to Des as we know it right now. However, it's extremely connected to the night, so I want to assume it is connected to Des in some way. For example, the Shadow Mantle, which you get to try to defeat the Knight, protects against dark and star attacks, which the Knight uses a bunch of star attacks. It shoots stars at you. During the fight, you can feel lightheaded and see silver stars and golden stars. And there is the book in chapter 4 that talks about the fallen star making rivers with its tears that probably are creating the shadow crystals, but it's unclear. That would also make sense to be Des. There are other people who talk about stars, though. Sham talks about walking where the stars don't shine in order to find the key piece for Jevil. Maybe that means something. Caddy says that Noelle has starry eyes. That's interesting. Ralsei also hopes for starry nights after Susie dreams of sunny days. And that's interesting because Susie has established herself as a character who would rather things go on the same way forever. So Ralsei is hoping for maybe change, as in like, the sun is going down, and then there will be stars, and maybe, it'll be different, but better? Maybe. That's a stretch of a reading into it, but maybe. And finally, of course, there's a bunch of star imagery in Chapter 3, including in the S-Rank room, where we literally watch a star fall off the wall. Now, it's interesting because the star in sort of biblical allegory, and the reason I keep bringing this up is because I think Chapter 5 is going to be fairly biblical. There's a lot of biblical stuff going on, which we'll get to. But the star in biblical sort of understanding is usually representative of a fallen angel, which is so interesting because the angel is like the main player in the cosmology of Deltarune. All right. Now that we've talked about Des, it's time to talk about her sister. It's time to talk about Noelle. The first symbol here is another one you may not have recognized, but I believe is important. That symbol is the rose. Now, the major visual for the rose being a symbol is that scrapped animation of the rose essentially falling apart during Chapter 4's Weird Route. It is now just like a big red crack that appears on the screen. This was due to people misinterpreting it, though. Not that Toby, just arbitrarily changed his mind. So the rose could still be a very important symbol with Noelle, and I would argue it definitely is. Not only is the thorn ring potentially related to a rose, because roses are known for their thorns, but also, once again, we're throwing back to this photo minigame from Chapter 3. The cactus's description is, the plant of spikes hides in the forest. It's no rose, but its thorns hold love, directly comparing the cactus to the rose. So what does the cactus mean? Well, I believe the cactus to be sort of symbolically representative of Susie, someone with spikes on the outside, but a soft, mushy interior, right? Somebody who is really a big softie, but projects this tough exterior. In that case, this could be a big metaphor about Susie taking Noelle's place in the prophecy, or even vice versa, on the weird route. After all, the second girl has hope crossed on her heart. But that's not all she has. She also has love, when love finds its way to the girl. And this description specifically says it's no rose, but its thorns can hold love, in reference to the cactus. So this kind of paints Susie as a replacement Noelle, right? Which this prophecy panel also kind of points to. This also ties into another theme I think we might see in Chapter 5. This is, again, a little bit more theory-wise. Everything up until now I think is pretty solid metaphor, but this is more theory, which is a Romeo and Juliet situation. So the phrase, "a rose by any other name would smell as sweet," is from Romeo and Juliet. Susie is therefore kind of a rose by another name. She's literally replacing the rose. And there's another interesting phrase from Romeo and Juliet that is very famous that I could see playing in here. That being, of course, the star-crossed lovers. We already talked about the star potentially being a metaphor for Des or the night. The night is heavily associated with stars. So instead of being like crossed by the fates, which to be fair, they also could be, the last prophecy could involve one of them dying. They could literally be star-crossed, like the star doesn't want them to be together, the star being the night and or Des. And of course, we all know how Romeo and Juliet ends, so it seems like every time I delve into one of these symbols, another character is marked for death. It's just not great. There's also this suspicious balcony-looking thing on the top of the Holiday Mansion, so we may have a Romeo wherefore art thou Romeo thing, because Noelle might be grounded from going to the festival with Susie, so we have to come break her out of her own house. She mentions that Chris used to do that. I could see that happening. It could also be the window, because I'm pretty sure that balcony is on the parents' room, which I don't know why Carol would lock Noelle in there, but who knows. Also related to Noelle, of course, is ice. But ice basically is just, whenever you see ice, you think, uh-oh, weird route. But Noelle is also related to another important concept, something we were talking about not that long ago. That being, of course, the angel. The soul, that's you! The soul represents your actions. There's not much more to it. The red soul, that's you. That's why when Toby wants to represent you being separate from Chris, the soul is separated from Chris, literally. So yeah, the soul is you. The angel, that's also you. And I know this could be considered a theory, but I'm like 99% sure the player is meant to be the angel. I mean, it's pretty on the nose when the soul, which represents the player's actions, is covered by an angel doll. It's like, okay, we're the angel. That makes sense. There's also the prophecy panel in Chapter 4 we're not allowed to see, where Ralsei says to Susie that the picture we can't see is of the angel, and Susie seems freaked out about it. If that picture was, say, Noelle, for some reason, I don't think she would react in that way. Why would Ralsei say, to our understanding, what it actually looks like, if it's just a person Ralsei's met? Why would Ralsei call it an it, if it's a person he's met? Why would he not say, to my understanding, what she actually looks like, or something like that? And then there's the metaphor of the hand. So you might have heard a lot of theorizing about the severed hand. In Chapter 4, we get explicitly like this long dialogue with Noelle and Susie where they talk about this horror movie about a severed hand. And Chris is already associated with the hand for many reasons. Well, one is the severed hand story starts with the protagonist waking up without their hand, but also, after viewing one of the shadow crystals, Chris can see through their hand. Now, let me remind you, this whole severed hand segment comes up while we, the soul, are severed from Chris. We are not, like, in Chris's body. Chris is somewhere else. We can't even see them. And then we get put under the angel doll during this same segment. This is all very on-the-nose foreshadowing, all right? What I believe that means to the story is that Chris represents our hand, because a hand is what we use to connect with the world. It represents control and power and connection between thoughts and actions. Chris being our hand in the world of Deltarune Makes a lot of sense. And then the severed hand, as a metaphor or foreshadowing for the future, could mean that we will be severed from Chris at some point later. Or maybe Chris is going to die too. Everybody dies. Woohoo! It sure seems like everybody's going to die anyway. The more I look into this, everybody's getting severed and Romeo and Julieting and sacrificed. It's not good. Then there was heaven. So this one's, again, a little bit more theory heavy than, like, you know, the last ones, which are spelled out for us pretty much. Heaven is first referenced by Spampton when he asked if heaven is watching. This reminds me a lot of that Sans line where he calls out, like, people who are watching other people do the genocide route. Because heaven, I believe, represents where we live, our reality, true reality, apart from the game. And so the angels' heaven is our world. The end of the prophecy represents us being banished from the world of Deltarune. That's not, I don't think, the most revolutionary thing. I think many have said the same thing at this point. And I truly believe that is the most logical explanation. Maybe we'll get some more stuff in Chapter 5 to change my mind, but as for now, that's how I feel about it. I don't know why the fountain rings with heaven's call. I'm not sure what that means. It could, I suppose, relate to the fact that the Titan is about to be formed, because the Titan also has angel wings, which this heaven prophecy clearly does as well, which ties into a certain theory of mine called the horseshoe reality theory. In brief, basically, it states that because the depths, we'll get to the depths, are basically the game's code, that both heaven and hell are on the same level of realness. And therefore, the Ring of Heaven's call could be like, okay, things are getting real, like literally, in terms of the Titan showing up, which is also why I believe the Titan has such fluid animation. Speaking of depths, So darkness. I made a whole video, a whole 50-minute long video about darkness and glass, so I'm not going to go super deep into them, but just know darkness seems to represent imagination. It's why the Dark Worlds are so imaginative. Similarly, it's why the Titans are so powerful. They are made from darkness and fear. And of course, in the dark, your fears can go wild, and anything you imagine could possibly be out there, any monster. However, once you expose that darkness to light, you see the truth, and then, of course, your fear might dissipate, and you gain courage. That's the most important thing. The other thing is a recontextualization of a line that has haunted us for many years in the Deltarune theory community. In Chapter 1, there's a puzzle, the first puzzle in the entire game, that states that in this land, the Dark World, only eyes blinded by darkness can see the way. Now, for a long time, that has led people to think like, okay, it's got to be darker than dark, or whatever. If we take this very literally, your eyes are not blinded by darkness if you're in the dark. If you're in the dark, your eyes get used to the darkness, and then you can see. Your eyes are only blinded by darkness if you've been in the light, which may imply that like only Lightners can, change the future of the Dark Worlds. Or, if you want to watch my theory called Neo Shadows on the Wall, it's very long. Something else. Water. Okay. Probably maybe the most important symbol in all of Deltarune is water. Water represents creation. That's why the dark fountains are fountains. It's why the fallen star weeps tears that carve rivers and lead to, glass. It's also why the roaring is likened to an ocean. Gerson calls the roaring an ocean of ink that will wash away the pages. Infinite creation, or in other words, after the prophecy is complete and the roaring happens, there being nothing but just sort of an infinite well of creation, because the prophecy which has bound this world for so long and informed events is over. That also makes sense. Susie also states that in the diner scene that the rain will come and wash away everything. Yeah, water is associated with the roaring. The roaring happens when there's too much darkness and dark fountains. It all ties together that way. And it explains why Ralsei's symbol is a wave, because Ralsei's major fear is the roaring. He knows what's going to happen, and he really doesn't want it to. He's also a creature of darkness. He wouldn't exist without it. And therefore, his symbol being this green wave makes a lot of sense. Hell. You don't get a lot of references to hell. To be fair, we don't get a lot of references to heaven either. Most of the references to hell, like if you searched up every time hell is used in Deltarune, it's going to be Susie going, "What the hell?" But there are some references to literal hell. Jevel says that when the queen returns, hell's roar will bubble from the depths. Depths, also a very important concept. Spampton says, "Too many excess vacation days? Take a goddamn vacation straight to hell." And finally, of course, there's the tale of hell. I mentioned this earlier with the horseshoe reality theory thing. I believe hell in this way, or the depths, is the game's code. After all, the Gonnermaker sequence uses the image depths as a background. It is an image of water, specifically it's a picture of the ocean that is edited. And so that sequence being related to sort of the device level or the level of Deltarune that sort of revolves around the actual functioning of the game, like where Gaster is, for example. That makes me believe that hell might be a representation of the game's code. After all, the game's code, I believe, is literally the prophecy. That's what's determining everybody's fates. It's the code. They can't go against the game's code because there's nothing else there. Everything that is coded into the game will happen, until maybe we change it somehow. The demon. This is even bigger of a stretch. The demon is not mentioned by name ever, other than, I guess, Raise Up Your Bat. But Raise Up Your Bat is a pretty important song, it appears, to foreshadowing things in Deltarune. Raise Up Your Bat says, "When the demon heart is crying." The demon heart probably being Chris's heart, of course, Chris's soul. And that could potentially tie us to being the demon. But I don't think that's what it is. I talked about earlier how Noelle has all these angelic traits to her, but it seems extremely clear that the player is meant to be the angel, or symbolized by the angel. Similarly, Chris has all these demonic traits about them. They wear the demon horn headband when they're a child. They have this red soul and fire and, red burning eyes. So those two being on the same level as being sort of representations of these two sides, perhaps, does actually make a lot of sense. And that opens up the door for the demon to be someone else. Could be Friend. Friend has a lot of motifs like 666, the Tale of Hell, all of these things. Or it could be Gaster. And that would be my pick, personally. Because we are the angel, Gaster being the opposite of us, this demon, makes almost too much sense. That gets into theory territory again, but just know there is demon symbolism with Chris, and that's probably because they are trying to complete the prophecy, which was written by Gaster. Our final section for the day will be truth. These two symbols represent truth. First is light. For all the importance that darkness has, light is kind of light on importance. The angel's power, may the angel's power light your way. There's northern light, which is a reference to the chapter 3 mantle game stuff. The prophecy, a world basked in purest light, beneath it grew eternal night. And of course, there's what we've been mentioning this whole time, which is once you expose darkness to light, you can gain courage and defeat fear. So light seems to represent reality, but not like heaven, right? Light and heaven aren't the same thing. Light represents what is actually going on in the world of Deltarune, in the same way that, like, for us, light would represent what's actually going on in our world. If we had a world above us, maybe we do. It's not so much the meta level of reality, but in terms of, like, this isn't the dark world. It's also not imagination. It's just what's actually there. And finally, glass. Glass, we are told straight up, is truth. Everything that happens, everything that is written in glass will happen. It is fate. You cannot change it. That is what we have been told over and over and over. And maybe by the end of the game we will be able to, or maybe we won't. But for now, everything we've seen written in glass will occur in some way, shape, or form. And that's it. That's my final theory before Chapter 5 releases. Not really a theory, but there are theories involved, for sure. The one thing I didn't get to mention, because there's really only like 2 lines, is the arc. You'll notice that the Pluie description that I put on there a while ago talks about an arc. And Raise Up Your Bat also mentions your heart will be the arc. Given that the roaring seems to be an ocean, it seems like arc is a symbol for something that's going to allow you to survive in the ocean and potentially save other people as well. We'll find out eventually. Probably not in Chapter 5, but maybe. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, like and subscribe. And I hope you'll enjoy Deltarune with me. All right. See ya after the sun goes down.
There is no here and no now. Only what those mad gods have in store for us all. Don't you wish you could just go